Welcome to the Digital Forge, the podcast where we explore how technology, innovation, and people are reshaping manufacturing and industry for the future. I'm really excited about today's guest, actually. Today I'm joined by Bruce Katz, one of the world's leading thinkers in cities, metropolitan economies, and local innovation. Bruce is the co-founder of the NOAC Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University, a visiting professor at the London School of Economics, and the author of books like The Metropolitan Revolution and The New Localism. Over the course of his career, Bruce has advised US presidents, including Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, prime ministers, including Gordon Brown and David Cameron, and city leaders from Amsterdam to Adelaide. He's helped shape how governments, investors, and civic leaders think about reindustrialisation, resilience, and the role of cities in solving our biggest challenges. In this episode, we'll explore Bruce's career, his vision for reindustrialisation in the United States, and what this means here in South Yorkshire. Bruce, welcome.
Great to be here.
You've had an absolutely amazing, really interesting career, but before we get into that, how did it all start? Where did you grow up, and how did you first make tracks into government?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and in my high school, public high school at the time, although I think public in Britain means something different.
Yeah. So you didn't go to Eton?
No, did not go to Eton. I went to a public high school near Coney Island. You were allowed to take the last 6 months of your high school and go to work. I went to work for a city councilman in New York and began to work on a lot of urban issues, particularly transportation. And so by the time I went to university, I knew I was on a track to focus on cities. And I knew I was taking a lot of urban history classes, but that was my passion.
What was it about that 6 months that kind of shaped your thinking, and how did you know that that's what you wanted to do?
Well, I think I always wanted to focus on issues that I could touch, I could feel, I could see. And if you're in New York City and you're focusing on housing or transportation or education, I mean, it's something that's in the newspaper every day, and it's something that people are living every day. So that part of the job was exciting. And then, of course, just the tumult of local politics and going in to see the mayor. It was an election year. There was an excitement to the whole thing.
So I guess it was about kind of making a difference, and you could see that by being in local government that you can actually make a difference. Absolutely.
I think particularly at that time, if I had grown up 10 years later, I might have made different career choices, but it was clear that the path to having an impact was through government.
So you went to some great universities, and university I know is different in the US to the UK. When you get in the UK, people kind of go and study a subject and only study that subject. In the US, of course, you do general ed. But what was your specialism at university? What did you study?
Well, I went to Brown and I went to Yale Law School, where actually I was allowed to pick what I wanted to focus on and go deep. So I purposely went to places where I could follow my passion. So at Brown, I was a history major, and I wrote my dissertation on Mayor Robert Wagner, who was mayor of New York from 1954 to 1965. I thought I was going to go to law school and then come back to New York City and run for office.
Seriously?
Yeah, I thought I would be an elected politician. I thought that was the route. So at the time, I was focusing on history, but history with a purpose.
So you had your eye on being a politician, on
Absolutely.
Going through that process.
Yep.
Hopefully, we'll get on to what changed your mind and why you didn't. I know it's a dirty business and all that, but that's really interesting. So after you graduated Yale, what did you go on to do?
So at the time, I was told that if I wanted to work for the governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, and the governor of New York has 7 legal advisors, and I wanted to be one of them, I needed to go to a law firm and get the focus and the discipline of working in an American law firm you get. So I went to a law firm based in Washington, D.C., though it was a New York law firm, and focused on urban real estate for a year and a half. And that was almost like a boot camp training ground. And after those 2 years, the Democrats won back the U.S. Senate, and I had the opportunity to go and be the counsel to a Senate subcommittee on housing and urban affairs. So I ditched going to work for Governor Cuomo and went to work for Senator Alan Cranston.
Were you a good lawyer?
I was a horrible lawyer. I was probably the worst lawyer anyone could ever have because I was completely bored out of my mind. And I did it as part of the path to doing what I loved, which was policy and impact and thinking and writing. I mean, but I had to go through that training.
So you're a Senate staffer. What does that career in Washington look like? Because I know you've worked for some presidents. How on earth did all this come around?
So our job, Reagan was president at the time, and there was basically the federal government was ignoring a rising homeless issue in the United States and rising housing unaffordability and a whole bunch of crises related to crime in our public housing estates. So my job, along with my colleagues, was to sort out the problem statement and to begin with practitioners all over the United States design legislation to remedy the challenge. And it was exciting, and the members I worked for were inspiring.
Wow. So really big. So you've got a homeless issue, and homelessness inevitably leads to all sorts of other social issues like crime, and I saw that in San Francisco firsthand. How do you recover situations like that? What does policy look like? How do you solve issues like that?
Well, at the time, we were dealing with trying to develop a series of housing responses, supportive housing, emergency housing. We had no infrastructure in the U.S. for this at a national scale. There were bits of innovations. As always in the U.S., someone somewhere is doing something in the U.S. that you can try to codify, and begin to replicate and adapt and scale. So that was our job, really. It was who's doing something interesting, and that ended up as the McKinney Homeless Act of 1987, I believe. And over time, it's evolved into a much broader set of responses.
And how do you measure efficacy of that? How did they measure efficacy of that, and was it successful?
Well, we had to start literally by understanding what was the scale of the homeless problem while dealing with other housing affordability issues. So we had to begin to put in place a whole data infrastructure in addition to designing the programs and then overseeing the delivery of the programs. And so no one teaches you any of this stuff, clearly. I mean, it's basically on-the-job training. A legal degree helps, because in the end you're writing statutes and so forth. But you tend to rely on networks, particularly of practitioners who are the innovators, and they basically carry a level of trust, experience, and knowledge that you can then move up to national policy.
Yeah, we'll come on to politics and how getting bipartisan support for policy is important a little later, or I suspect when we talk about reindustrialization. But you then went on to work for Bill Clinton, and I have to say I met Bill Clinton. And whenever anybody asks me who's the most famous person you've ever met, and I have to think about it, it's actually Bill Clinton. And I was just totally amazed. I saw him speak at a very small gathering, and he was just absolutely incredible. What was he like to work for? And how did you end up working for him first?
So what happened was, at that point, I had become the staff director of the subcommittee, and you have to confirm members of the president's cabinet. And Bill Clinton had nominated a man named Henry Cisneros, who had been the mayor of San Antonio, to be his Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So Henry came up to the Hill, or I went to see Henry at the transition office, because he had to be confirmed by our committee. 12 Democrats, 9 Republicans. You learn how to count. So Henry came up, and we spent about 8 or 9 hours together. Here are the issues that the committee is dealing with. This senator will probably ask you this. This senator will ask you that. Just bringing him up to speed. Henry Cisneros is one of the most remarkable people I've ever met in my life. So the next day he called me and says, "Would you like to be my chief of staff?" And I had not really thought about going into the government. I love working for the Senate. I had wonderful members I worked with. And so I said, well, you might want to call some of my bosses and see what they would think about that. But he was so inspiring that I made the choice to go work with him, for him, and then by extension by President Clinton.
So did you spend much time with Clinton?
Well, Clinton was involved in the beginning. It was a very ambitious period when Clinton came in. The Republicans had owned the White House for 12 years, so the first Democrat in 12 years. And so related, issues around empowerment zones, which was actually borrowed from Britain. He was very involved in some of the policy design meetings early on, which I thought was quite strange. I mean, he was such a knowledgeable person, having been governor of a state. As the tenure went on, they delegated enormous responsibility to our department, and we would check back in essentially, but we were given the freedom to basically think big and really have a dramatic impact. Cisneros' tenure as HUD is generally considered to be the most effective of any housing minister in the United States.
I mean, I first went to the US in the late 90s and actually started in New York. And it's the time when it was going through a positive transition, particularly Times Square. I remember it went from being a no-go zone to being actually a tourist area, like it is now. And the US in general was the economy was, I mean, you had a budget surplus. It was incredible. How much credit do you give to the Clinton administration for that? And how much of it was just because the internet happened? And
well, I think what Clinton was part of a correction to some extent, particularly in the Democratic Party. I mean, you had it here with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Yeah.
It allowed for across multiple sectors and multiple issues, housing, transportation, education, to really think about responses in a much broader way than just here's the government top-down, bureaucratic, compartmentalized, siloed. Let's start bringing in the private sector. Let's start thinking much more broadly about interventions. So there was a freedom that occurred because of, and Clinton was part of a movement. He was, but there were others before him: Gary Hart, Jerry Brown, all the rest. But Clinton was a remarkable human being. Is a remarkable human being. I mean, so charismatic and just so knowledgeable about so many things that you get as being a governor in the U.S. It's very different to be in an executive role than as a legislator.
I mean, I hate to draw parallels with British politicians, but we were talking last night about when I bumped into, and I'm not a fan of Nigel Farage, but bumped into Farage at a cricket match. And his ability to connect reminded me so much of Clinton. Clinton's ability to connect with people so that person thinks that is the only thing in his life at that moment. Did you get that feeling when you worked with him as well?
Well, when you work inside the government, our interaction was very much about taking policy to a whole nother level. We were responsible for tearing down 1/10 of the public housing units in the United States, which, as you can imagine, in the Democratic Party was quite controversial. But it was the right thing to do. The gangs were running council projects in Chicago and Philadelphia, all over the United States. It was a really difficult period. And we basically went through a process of tearing down and then through this public housing transformation program, replacing with mixed income. Highly contentious. But the only signals we got from Bill Clinton and Al Gore and the whole White House was, go. This is exactly why we ran. And
so, I mean, this is one of my sort of pet peeves with politics is that nowadays, and, you know, I'm beginning to sound like my grandfather did, but nowadays, in the UK, they're called SPAD, Special Advisors, and they all seem to be about 12 years old, to be honest. And it's the first question that I hear from SPADs these days is, how will this look from a PR perspective?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes you've just got to do the right thing, like tearing down 10% of the housing.
Yeah.
How, at that time, did the Clinton administration mentally get over that hump of knowing that this is not going to be that popular when we first start doing it? People are going to complain like hell. How do you force through a policy like that?
Well, it was clear to anyone that we had a massive problem on our hands. I mean, literally gangs were running projects. And my boss, Henry Cisneros, literally, when he went to a city, he would sleep in a public housing project.
Wow.
Okay. He would stay there. He would engage with tenants and residents who basically were the ones saying, this can't continue. My children are at risk. So he was able, in a way, to live the problem. And therefore, when he articulated, we are going to move forward with the following initiative, there was a level of trust that he had built, not just within the political establishment, but literally on the ground. And he had also created deep relationships in the Congress. By that point, the Republicans were back in control. This was the Gingrich Revolution. Yeah. They were back in charge of the House and the Senate. But he had built relationships across party lines. So I credit Secretary Cisneros for being able to pull this off. I highly doubt another individual would have done it.
So basically, it just transcends politics.
Absolutely.
He's sleeping in these places. He's talking to the residents. He's beyond just politics.
He's a leader.
Yeah,
that's what leaders do.
Yeah,
and because of that, we were able to do remarkable things.
I think there's a lesson for modern day politicians. That's you lead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And then you've also worked for Obama.
So when I left the Clinton administration, I went to Brookings to start a center on cities and metropolitan areas. And one of the great things about Brookings was complete intellectual freedom to follow your muse, so to speak, but also the ability to be seconded to government for whole periods of time. So when 2007, 2008, the mortgage crisis, the housing crisis, basically the Obama transition asked me to co-lead the transition team, and then I went in for the first 100 days to basically set everything up with the new secretary, Sean Donovan, who I knew. The U.S. is a big country. It's actually a fairly small place when you get down to the policy and politics. I mean, you tend to know everyone if you're in the game. So I went in for the first 100 days, incredible period because we're in the middle of a crisis. And so, but then I went back to Brookings and then really began to shift a lot of our work towards reindustrialization.
Just on Obama for a second, I was really excited, and I've still got the New York Times front page in my library at home when Obama was elected, because it's one of those things where, the Churchill quote that Americans do the right thing after exhausting every other possibility, and it was like it felt like it was the right thing to do, and I was full of hope, especially for, post the prior administration that was all focused on oil and oil protection and having wars. But I was devastated with Obama. I thought he could have done so much but achieved so little. And maybe that's unfair. How do you feel about Obama's time?
Well, so I first met Barack Obama when he was a state senator in Illinois. Remarkable person, very different from Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Incredible intellect, incredible orator, and an organizer in many respects. So I walked out of the first meeting with him. I don't know how old he was, and I called someone and said, he's going to be the next governor of Illinois, which how much did I know, right? It's like, but here's a talent.
Yeah.
I think he, again, like Bill Clinton, the Republicans came back after 2 years. So there was a bit of overreach, maybe, but Obamacare, which was his signature achievement, triggered a response. But I think he was able, it's rare that presidents are able to achieve that kind of social impact, but very different than Clinton, and still is playing a central role in the American political system.
I mean, healthcare has, and I say I lived in the US, as you know, for 23 years, and the healthcare thing always puzzles me. I mean, so Obamacare, from my perspective, was just basically insurance reform. I mean,
right.
What I always used to say to people is Medicare actually works, which is the basically nationalized health service that they have in the United States. You could extend that and create universal health care for everyone. It actually works pretty well. It's really efficient.
It works very well. But our politics are so completely bonkers. I mean, so you're always just navigating around to get to something that can get passed and enacted.
I know this is a complete rat hole to go down, but do you think healthcare can ever get fixed in the United States? Is it ever going to happen?
I don't. I mean, for the foreseeable future, at this stage, we got so many issues that we're dealing with. So, I mean, and after the Trump administration is done, I mean, there'll be. I mean, this is really what I'm focusing on now, which is I have a feeling that the long-term effect of Trump, they've centralized power in the White House, but they're decentralizing responsibility for problem solving. At the end of the day, someone has to solve our disparate problems. They're pushing it down to the states, cities, and counties, and the private and philanthropic sectors. We will end up as a very different republic. So my next book is called The Next Republic.
All right, we'll get into that in a second. So actually on that, so you went from Washington politics and you put all your energy into cities and metropolitan regions. Why? Did you just realize that problems could be solved there?
Well, I just went back to where I started, really. I mean, when I started working for the city council and when I thought about running for office, I really have always felt that at the end of the day, it's the local where you solve problems. And the reason you solve problems is because problems are multidimensional. When you go up in your system to the national government, you have a Department of Housing, you have a Department of Education, you have a Department of Health, and you talk about collaboration and integration, but it's an unnatural act, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
At the local level, it really does come together. Not just within government, but across networks of private and civic institutions. And that, to me, is the most exciting thing about making a difference.
So your two books, The Metropolitan Revolution and The New Localism, just talk to us about those and what inspired you to write them.
I think what inspired me to write them was to put forward this notion that when we talk about cities or we talk about metropolitan areas, we are not talking about governments.
Yeah. We're
talking about networks.
Yeah.
We live in a networked economy. We lived in a network society. So if we really want to grapple with the hard issues, we need to understand how networks work and how radical collaboration can be brought to fore. And so I went back to my roots, really. I mean, in some ways, I love working for the federal government. I had great, inspiring bosses. I've worked with governors and states, but it's at the city level that stuff actually happens.
So is the notion then that people on the ground, people in these cities, like we're sat in the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority office at the moment, that these people understand problems and therefore know what solutions are required. So is this a devolution kind of process? Is that what needs to happen, that you disperse money into these local regions?
It's really money and power and agency and a kind of cultural orientation, to not ask permission and to not look up. We're waiting for the government to do something. No one in the U.S. is waiting for the government to do anything, particularly now. I mean, it's about taking responsibility. And when you go up the system and you're at the federal level and you go to the transportation department and say, we have a congestion problem, generally speaking, they'll give you a transportation response as opposed to, well, maybe we should locate housing and jobs differently. I mean, at the local level, you tend to think about challenges and solutions in a radically different way.
Give us an example of where this has worked incredibly well, where it went from that centralized command and control to local decision-making, empowerment, and money. Give us a really good example.
I mean, if you take the housing crisis in the United States right now, and here's another example. At Drexel, I had been involved at the federal level with a housing task force in 1988 with Jim Rouse and David Maxwell, who then was chair of the Fannie Mae. And about 2 or 3 years ago, the housing crisis was metastasizing in the United States. So I called my former boss and said, let's just start a task force. I mean, we don't need it to ask anyone to do this. I mean, we know a lot of people. So we got the governor of Utah, Republican, mayor of Atlanta, Democrat, mayor of Cleveland, Democrat, and Fifth Third Bank based in Cincinnati to co-chair this thing. And then we've got about 25, 30 other practitioners, not generally just having people doing stuff. And now we have our whole National Housing Crisis Task Force. We just got $1 million from the Bomber Foundation, et cetera. I mean, this is the way the U.S. rolls. If you go to Atlanta, so even under Biden, under Trump, it's hard to say what the federal government's doing on the housing crisis. But in Atlanta, the mayor came in, says, I need 20,000 units over 8 years. I'll be in here probably for 2 terms. I'm going to have a housing strike force. Any local agency that touches housing is going to be in the strike force. And week by week, we're going to figure out how we're getting to that goal. I'm going to set up a new public asset corporation modeled after the Copenhagen City and Port Corporation. So I'm going to borrow from Europe about how to use our land and buildings in the service of housing production. And I'm going to raise money from the corporate and the philanthropic sector to fill gaps in the housing capital stack. That's leadership.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about how do you take what Atlanta did on its strike force, on the Public Asset Corporation, and on this new capital stack and blow it through the United States.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if you do have this bottom-up approach versus the top-down government approach, you can bring private money into the mix. And how important is it to bring private money, corporate finance, in
fundamental?
Yeah.
I mean, the government doesn't have enough resources to deal with name your favorite issue, and there's an appropriate role for debt, equity, concessionary capital, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got to think about finance in a very different way when we're talking about these domestic issues.
It's interesting because I don't know why, but it always strikes me in the UK that there is this incessant need for everything to be public money financed, and they don't bring enough private capital into the mix. Why is that? Why is the US good at this and the UK is not good at this?
Well, the US is a distributed federal republic. I mean, so, everyone's in charge, no one's in charge. I mean, it's sort of like, to some extent what's happening right now is sort of confusing.
Yeah.
Because it's not really how the U.S. operates. You're one of those centralized governmental systems in the world. I mean, there was an American who came over to run the London Transport Authority who said, after being in England for 2 years, this is North Korea with elections. I mean, it's just, you're running everything from the top, and it's just, you're you're too big of a country to have like a bunch of ministers making decisions about issues which do vary dramatically from a Liverpool to a London. You know?
Is that why so much capital allocation in the UK is focused on the southeast and London? Is that why it happens there?
Yeah, I mean, we have a bit of the same issue in the U.S. We have a lot of our capital is, obviously aggregated in Silicon Valley, just to a lesser extent Boston and New York. And a lot of it then goes back to those particular places. The interesting question really about private capital is, where does it originate? Because when I go to Ohio or to Pittsburgh or to Alabama or to Georgia, I basically say to a lot of the wealthy families, corporations, pension funds, your biggest export is your wealth. You're sending it to Silicon Valley, and then to institutional investors when you have the capital locally to reinvest in yourself. And there's so much happening in these places. So we do have, and this is where the federal government has been very helpful. There's a opportunity zones, tax advantage capital scheme in the U.S., capital gains tax relief. The places where it worked, and there's a lot of places where it hasn't worked, but this is to try to get private capital to move into areas of deprivation. It's really worked in states like Alabama, where local capital has been deployed.
Yeah, we're going to move on to reindustrialization and how this can work in a second. But just going back to the point about the biggest export being your wealth, your capital. In the UK, and we were discussing this last night, only about 4.2% of UK pension funds are invested in UK equities. The vast majority is invested in the United States and Silicon Valley. And people wonder why we don't get scale-ups in any sort of volume here. Well, it's because we're exporting our capital. There are examples where government has implemented policy to keep the capital here. Just talk about that and what effect that's actually had.
Well, Quebec is probably the best example of the provincial set of pension funds that have reinvested back in their own economy. You see this to some extent in the U.S. with what we would call economically targeted investments from our pension funds. But private capital is such a critical mix of growing a robust and resilient economy. And who's better to invest than people who understand what's your special sauce?
Yeah.
Because this is what's quite interesting. When you start talking about traded sectors and innovation and industry, it differs dramatically from place to place. And so there are all these possibilities and opportunities that are created.
Yeah, so the UK, to be clear to everybody, doesn't have a capital problem. There's 3 trillion of it in pension funds. We've got a capital allocation issue.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That needs to get fixed.
Absolutely.
So let's just talk about reindustrialization. So we're seeing, I think it started with the previous regime and has been continued with the Trump regime, but there is a move to reindustrialization in places like Ohio, Pittsburgh, and probably triggered by this sudden reality that we need to protect supply chains and rearm ourselves. Just I know that's a very big question, but just explain to everyone in fairly simple terms what's going on.
Yeah, so it started with COVID and the disruption with supply chains, but the geopolitical tensions that we're experiencing in the world today, the world's a dangerous place.
Yeah,
I mean, Russian invasion of Ukraine, the threat that China has posed to Taiwan, the list goes on. And what this has basically in the United States led to is a dramatic rise in defense spending and a dramatic commitment to national security and production at home. Now, this had already started with regard to some other critical areas of technology, biomanufacturing, semiconductors. These are related to national security. So reindustrialization, reshoring, after decades of offshoring and outsourcing to a radical extent, has been a common mantra actually across parties. I mean, if you look at Biden, if you look at Trump, the only common, theme is investment in defense at dramatic scales, given the nature of the world. The question then becomes, this doesn't happen uniformly across the whole landscape of the United States. We do end assembly of our nuclear-powered submarines in Newport, Rhode Island, and Newport News, Virginia. We have major aerospace manufacturing in St. Louis. I mean, the list goes on. And then we have supply chains, particularly around radically accelerating technologies in the Pittsburghs of the world and Atlantas of the world. So this is complicated to basically reindustrialize after you were told for decades, we're going to be a post-industrial economy, whatever the hell that means. So production and innovation are so inextricably linked, fundamentally linked. And I think we're finally getting back to understanding, how critical this is for jobs, for quality jobs, and for resilient economies.
Yeah, I mean, under Thatcher here, and we felt the pain of this in South Yorkshire in particular with our steel industry and coal industry and so on, that we deindustrialized. It's looking at things in hindsight is always a bit flawed, but let's just do it for a second. Was that policy in the 1980s the wrong policy? Did Thatcher, for example, here take it too far? And to what extent did deindustrialization happen in the United States?
Well, it happened radically. It happened, particularly in the turn of the century. Global economy. Where should we, make our clothes? I mean, you could talk about all these different products and goods, and where should they be manufactured in the world today, and in a globalized economy. But we offshored and outsourced sophisticated manufacturing, which is what we're now reshoring. And it's not your parents' manufacturing. These are different kinds of factories that we're now building. Many of them are highly automated, with dramatic use of robots, cobots, artificial intelligence, 3D printing. I mean, the list goes on and on. This is an advanced economy. And so we need to have more of that home with our allies and our trading partners for a whole bunch of different reasons.
So one of the modern day missiles of war is NVIDIA's chips, super-powered chips for the underpinnings of artificial intelligence. So there is U.S. government legislation that's preventing those chips being exported to China.
Right.
What's the thinking behind that?
Well, again, I think we're in the middle of a new kind of Cold War, hopefully, where we've had decades of technology basically pilfered and pillared and pilloried. I think we're finally getting a balance back, and part of the challenge right now is we're after like 4 years of a dramatic investment around climate change technology, electric batteries, offshore wind, electric car, all the rest of it. The Trump administration is pulling back on that. So what we're seeing is a level of instability and inconsistency. But I do think there needs to be a focus on protecting technologies, particularly those related to national security, and understanding we're in a different world today.
Yeah, I mean, it can be confusing listening to Trump because he'll call climate change the biggest hoax the world's ever seen on one hand, and then on the other hand, you see this incredibly nationalist style of speaking about onshoring semiconductor manufacture, but actually that's the right policy, isn't it?
It is the right policy.
It's just that it's hidden behind this sea of confusing rhetoric that I must admit sometimes when I listen to him, I don't really know what's going on.
And Biden, again, there's a consistency about reshoring. Biden did it through the CHIPS Act and other interventions. Trump is trying to do it through tariffs. And both invested heavily in defense manufacturing and defense innovation. consistently. So where does all this end up? In my world, what I care about are places and understanding what is their role in this broader domestic and global upheaval. What are their assets? What are their strengths? How do they leverage those? What are their pain points? And getting about the business of solving the challenges that are before them.
Yeah, I've been to Taiwan many times and seen the scale of semiconductor manufacture, Compal, etc., TSMC over there. I was really shocked at the pace at which the US has managed to onshore semiconductor manufacture. Just out of interest, what do you think the impact? Do you think that China is going to take over, whichever way you want to look at it, Taiwan? Firstly, and then secondly, what is the impact? What would the impact to the U.S. economy be of that if it does happen? Do you think the U.S. will let it happen?
Well, I think we are in a process, and this is really a large part of the remilitarization, of deterring that kind of aggression and sending the signals, hopefully with our allies, you and Australia, and
NATO.
Exactly. I think we're trying to send signals to deter that right now. That's the whole point of the military buildup we're experiencing.
What is the size of the problem if China does do that? If China,
it's dramatic. I mean, I think the level of disruptions, that are predictable and unpredictable. I mean, I think so. The whole point of this period is to say, let's bring sanity into the conversation. On the home front, the reshoring, one thing to think about, the big semiconductor investments in the United States, Intel in Columbus, Micron in Syracuse, and TSMC in Phoenix.
Just give us an idea of the scale of those. How big are these factories? How many people do they employ? What's the?
The construction themselves are thousands upon thousands. The permanent workforce are thousands upon thousands, and the footprint and the impact on energy and power and infrastructure and workforce is dramatic. So this is a major in what are economies of 1.5, 2.5, 3 million people. These are major reverberating effects, right? Both direct effects, thousands and thousands of jobs, indirect benefits. But TSMC went to Phoenix. Phoenix has been has been in Taiwan and Japan and Korea for decades. I mean, we have economic development at the state level, at the local level, public, private, civic. It's not surprising to me that that's where they went. So that's the other thing about the U.S. We're 50 states, or hundreds and hundreds of cities and counties, which allow for a robust competitive environment to vie for this.
And what's the impact on those economies of reshoring, of reindustrializing? What's happening in places like Phoenix?
Well, what's happening is there's a scramble, as you would imagine, to find skilled workers. And so the system locally it's one thing to say, oh, guess what? We won the big prize. TSMC is coming to this area of Phoenix. Then the question is, okay, where are the workers going to come from? How are the workers going to get to this facility, which is pretty far out? Where's the housing? Where's the childcare? Okay, so industrial policy at the federal level is mostly around a big move in a particular sector. And then when you get to the local level, it's a completely holistic, integrated kind of response. Because if this is going to actually succeed, it's not just, the big sort of banner, TSMC has come to Phoenix. It's workers who basically are able to have the skills necessary to succeed.
Just listening to you talking about that, it does remind me of stories that you hear about the Industrial Revolution, and suddenly you build factories in Sheffield, and then you're bringing people from the countryside to come and work in those factories. It's the same thing again, isn't it?
It's very much, but it means you need community colleges, you need your four-year universities, you need your business alliances, you need your transportation agencies, your energy utilities, and then your housing. I mean, You have to mobilize all these different parts of your ecosystem in the same direction. That's what our elected officials do to a large extent in close collaboration with business, university, and philanthropy.
Well, I mean, just listening to that, of course, being passionately British, it makes me think the United Kingdom, we're behind here.
But the devolution that you've begun, particularly at the combined authority level, which is where the economy sits, really. I mean, It's not just at a city level, it's at the metropolitan scale, is the right move. It's absolutely fundamentally the right move. And these new mayors and these authorities need to be given the power and the resources to get the job done.
So just on that, let's talk about South Yorkshire. So you're in town because you've just, with colleagues, launched the South Yorkshire Growth Plan. So where do you think, what is the opportunity here? And I think you've looked out to 2035. What do you think could happen?
Well, so it all starts with these macro forces, some of which are market, some of which are technology, some of which are political. Basically, because of what's going on in the world, South Yorkshire has been completely revalued because you have a manufacturing legacy, you have competencies and capabilities around high-precision engineering, steel. You've got a university, University of Sheffield, with very strong competencies in niches around industrial machinery, metals, etc. You've got Sheffield Hallam and your further education institutions that know how to train people. You are going to become a critical node of the UK's industrial heartland for defense, for clean energy, for biomanufacturing and other things. I mean, because you just can't suddenly take a particular place and say, oh, you were doing X before, now you're going to do Y. This is your history. This is who you are. So it's a carpe diem moment to a large extent.
So on that carpe diem moment, it wasn't cool to be in steel 20 years ago.
Right.
It was the UK wanted to be financial services and a service economy full of consultants. Now we kind of know that AI is going to hollow that out. So do you think the UK has the leadership and appetite to execute this plan?
I think you're sending a lot of signals that you do. You have a defense industrial strategy. You have 8 sectors that are part of the central government strategy. Defense being a critical one, advanced manufacturing, it's related, digital technology, it's related. You're sending signals that you are willing to invest. And from my perspective, with these defense growth deals that have been announced, you recognize that certain places have certain roles to play, and you're going to give them the resources they need to play those roles. That's a big deal. I mean, and it gives you a platform to do more, particularly around private capital and entrepreneurial innovation and so forth.
So to execute this, we're going to need private capital coming in.
Absolutely.
How do you get that? How does that happen?
I mean, I think, you've got to declare, and for a place like South Yorkshire, this is our position. This is not just about England or the UK. This is Europe writ large and, your allies in Australia, North America, Asia and beyond. You have to basically rebrand yourself to some extent.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the rest of the world totally. I think Pittsburgh knows what Sheffield does because Pittsburgh's your sister city. But across a vast set of countries, companies, and investors, the first order of business right now is to basically educate people about what is here, which is substantial. I mean, in the U.S., we're a culture where people just crow about themselves, whether you're a person or a place, It's just like who we are, right?
Yeah.
If you were an American city or metro, you probably would see a big banner at the train station, welcome to Sheffield, the industrial city or whatever. So you got to get, this is marketing with evidence. You're not making this stuff up. It's authentic. This is who you are. That's the first order of getting capital and investment.
Yeah, when I first went to the US, I was shocked at the TV ads because you'd have VW saying that BMW were crap. I could not believe it, the aggression. But it's kind of what you need to do. It's as you say, Sheffield needs to come and say, actually, we're the best advanced manufacturing center in the world. Period.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And then, as we've talked about, there's a lot to make sure that's real, particularly as you apply and adapt changing technologies and all the rest of it.
So let's just briefly touch on opportunity zones and that policy in the US to attract private capital into regions. How do they work?
Well, this is an idea that Cory Booker, who was, when I first knew Cory Booker, he was mayor of Newark, New Jersey. Then he became senator from New Jersey, and has always been a Democratic senator very interested in technological innovation. So he worked with a network of technology leaders in California to come up with this idea. The idea is to try to bring private capital into areas of distress and deprivation in the United States. So the way it works in the U.S. is we have let's say 32,000 zip codes where the poverty rate is beyond a certain percentage. The governors were given the ability to designate a quarter of those, like 8,000, and then the tax advantage capital is we'll give you relief on capital gains tax if you invest back into these areas through opportunity zone funds. It has worked unbelievably well in places like Alabama. Alabama is one of our 50 states. It usually ranks 52 out of 50 on just about anything. But it was able to get local wealth, corporate financial institutions to come together with pools of capital on one side and then identify projects in the cores of Birmingham and Selma and Montgomery and Huntsville and then in rural areas. So you can match private capital to really smart projects. It's worked really well there. In other parts of the country, it's been like a real estate kind of deal, and it hasn't really achieved its full potential. But we now have Opportunity Zones 2.0 because the Congress just made them permanent and extended them and all that. So I do think we have the opportunity, so to speak, to really take the Alabama example, other examples from Erie, Pennsylvania and beyond, San Antonio, Texas, and really have a major impact.
So in the report, I was reading that there are a few things that are precursors to this reindustrialization strategy around here. One is that only 1% of residents can get to the advanced manufacturing park within 30 minutes. So there's a transportation issue. And the second one you've already mentioned, which is on the reindustrialization in the US, where in places like Phoenix, there's a scramble to get skills. Yeah. How do you fix those two issues? And they're obviously critical issues, aren't they?
Well, I do think, the good news is you have this concentration. I mean, your region has a vast number of manufacturing firms or firms that are feeding into manufacturing companies, and it's highly distributed. But it does tend to concentrate and co-locate around the advanced manufacturing part, Sheffield, and crosses over Rotherham and all that. And the Advanced Manufacturing Research Center, started 20 years ago, University of Sheffield, is quite unusual globally, actually, in terms of the interplay of the academy, industry, workforce training, entrepreneurial startups, and so forth. So as you get a surge, which you will get in production, it requires your universities and your further education institutions to come together like in one unified punch to understand the continuum of skills that need to be served and work with companies. Companies should lead this. Yeah. What do they need across the vast continuum of occupations? And then secondly, the transport pieces need to be sorted out in terms of tram extensions and so forth and so So there's nothing like an economic restructuring to focus the mind on what actually has to get done.
Yeah.
And bottom line, you need more companies here and you need more investment here. You're just getting started.
Yeah.
So the surge that is happening already, this is only a beginning of something.
And as you know, Bruce, I'm investing in businesses here, and I'm shocked at the lack of competition that we have in investments that we're making. It does seem that there is a lack of sophisticated capital to invest in businesses here, and that's something that, as we said, that there's a capital allocation issue. We need to get funds from in this country, from London and internationally, to come and look at this place, because, as you said, there are assets here that in a new reindustrialized global economy are really interesting. I mean,
that's just a market failure to be corrected.
Yeah.
Anytime you have that kind of misalignment of capital and opportunity, someone's going to step in and fix it.
Yeah. I mean, capital should be a heat-seeking missile for opportunity. And so the plan identifies 4 growth areas: Sheffield City Centre in the innovation spine, Don Valley, Barnsley Town Centre, and South Yorkshire Airport City. This is the clustering approach that I know you're familiar with. How does that compare with things that you've seen in the United States?
Well, it's quite similar. I mean, in many respects. The most important thing about the investment playbook that we worked on was to provide the evidence. Because in the U.S., what we're able to basically say, because of sort of the deep data, hopefully that won't go away under Trump, is to say, here's what Phoenix does, and here's what Pittsburgh does. And that allows you to then leverage opportunities and resolve challenges in a pretty efficient and effective manner. And that's what we've tried to bring here, which is among the mayoral combined authorities. What is it that South Yorkshire is good at compared to others? And we were early on saying, hey, you have enormous capabilities in defense. Most people think about defense as, you have to go to Barrow, which is where they do the end assembly on some of the nuclear-powered subs. Actually, a lot of that starts here. About 60% of what's going into nuclear power subs is getting manufactured, created somewhere else.
Yeah.
So really thinking about supply chains and the role of this conurbation is pretty essential.
Yeah, a lot of investment, billions, going into Sheffield Forge Masters, of course, which is the reason why we can make nuclear submarines here in the UK. We shouldn't forget that.
But if you have the right narrative about your economic position, the clustering in particular places or particular projects around the university or community colleges, they're derivative. They sort of tumble out naturally because you've read your economy correctly and you're able to act with evidence and purpose.
So if there's perfect execution, what could this look like in 10 years? What would success be?
I think success would be you would be globally recognized as one of the core nodes of advanced industry in the world. I think that actually is doable. And that would then have all these knock-on effects, whether it's company expansion, company recruitment, company creation, private investment, quality jobs, good jobs for people who live here. And for the children to sort of make their way through, various components of education. I mean, these are sophisticated jobs. That's why they pay well. So I think within a 10-year period, look, we've experienced this in the U.S., places that were, quote unquote, left for dead. Last one who leaves, turn the lights out.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh is back. I mean, Pittsburgh had a steel crisis in the late 1970s. It took a while to find its footing. It is now the center of AI and robotics in the United States, along with Silicon Valley. And, ipso facto there, it's a global hub. I mean, it's an innovation playground. When you go there, it's just remarkable what's happening.
What does this look like? What does it mean for the citizens, for the people that live there?
I think there's the mayor talks about pride.
Yeah,
it's very much about this is a good place to live. There are opportunities for myself and for my kids.
Yeah,
and there's a sense of a rising tide. And that then leads to lots of other, it has effects on health. It has an effect on wealth. It has an effect on many disparate things.
It's just listening to you talk about it then, there's an inevitability that if the strategy if the marketing's done correctly, if the strategy is laid out, which the growth plan is certainly the beginnings of this, then capital will follow. It has
Capital will follow, yeah. You've got to harness all this natural energy, and that's, in some extent, here. In the U.S., it's a bit different because we have a lot of private business and philanthropy and all the rest. But here, it really is the role of mayors in some respects and of the local authorities. So, but this is totally doable. Because the macro forces have revalued you. You can decide, I don't want to listen to this, and it's not entirely clear. And you have other assets, creative industries. You just won all these Emmy Awards for adolescents. You got other stuff going on here. But advanced industry is clearly, it's in your bones, it's in your DNA. It's coming back.
Yeah, in the 1850s, 85% of the world steel was made here. That it does feel like it's a cycle, and it does feel like we're going to be returning, maybe not 85% of the world's steel supply anymore, but we are going to be central to this new global economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just some, that's fascinating, Bruce, by the way, just some quick fire questions. So you've advised presidents, prime ministers, mayors around the world. What's the biggest lesson you've learned about how places thrive?
The biggest lesson I've learned is understand who you are. Figure out who you are and do it on purpose. That's a Dolly Parton line, right? So Dolly Parton turns out to be the great economic thinker of our time. And that's literally it. So figure out who you are. What makes you special? And do it on purpose is organize yourself across disciplines, across jurisdictions, across sectors, and have that singular purpose and just get it done. And I do think a lot of this, sometimes it almost feels like therapy, You're better than you think you are. And particularly now, this is such a fundamental reshaping of the global economy. And
around here, it feels like a confidence issue. If you've ever seen the film The Full Monty and all that.
Great movie.
But it sort of defined this area, and it's a drain in confidence. And listening to you talk today, do you think the and this is a bit unfair, we're sat in Oliver Coppard's offices here, but do you think that the powers that be around here understand this? Do you think they get it?
I think the mayor does, clearly.
Right.
I think his advisors do. I think, and this is the kind of the thing. There's a lot of PTSD, to tell you the truth, about economic and industrial decline, and we've experienced this in the U.S. But change starts with literally a small group of people saying, "We have a path here. We have a vision." It is not delusional. It is literally rooted in evidence. And then you begin to see others coming around saying, okay, what role can we play in that? Whether it's the educational institutions, placemaking, company recruitment, all the rest. So I do think that this is a moment for leadership. My view of national governments and central governments is that they enable.
Yeah.
But someone does the work. When I was working at the housing ministry in the United States, my boss would always say, we don't build one home here. Okay, let's all get that straight. Someone else is actually doing the work. We're enabling it. We're supporting it. Hopefully we're having, more benefit than harm.
Just give them the power and get out of the way.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've obviously spent quite a bit of time now in South Yorkshire as part of this advisory role that you've got with the Mayor's office. What do you like about South Yorkshire?
Oh, I just think it's just an exceptional play. It's gritty, you know. It's sort of, in many ways, the road network is just like completely irrational in the core. I mean, it's like, I mean, how does anyone ever find their way around here? I mean, it's just.
I don't think they do.
It's just.
It was designed for horses and carts, I think.
It's just. But I think in part of that, you know, is there's. It doesn't feel like any other place. Like when you're in Sheffield in South Yorkshire, you know you're here. You know, this is like a special, distinctive place. And it's got lots of nooks and crannies that you can go explore. So I'm whenever I come back here, I'm like always inspired by any number of things.
And finally, what advice would you give to leaders who want to make a difference? You work for some amazing people. What advice would you give, say, to Oliver, who wants to make a difference?
I mean, I think leaders have to exude, and you mentioned this, a level of confidence and an aspirational, inspiring purpose. So in many respects, their job is to lead, right? A lot of times in government, people focus on the hard power. I'm managing this agency, you know, and I got to make sure the trains run on time. And actually, I think great leaders, and I've worked for a whole bunch of them, really set out a vision and allow others to sort out how they can participate in getting to the execution of the vision. You still have to make the trains run on time, I suppose, or close enough, right? But it's, in some ways, it's the vision thing, and it's the ability to inspire people to do grand things together, because this is a collaborative act. And I think that's what you have in this mayor, and increasingly in England, you know, and beyond the United Kingdom. By devolution enables a whole group of people, some that you expect and most of you don't, to take agency and improve not just their lives, but the lives of their neighbors and places. So this is a fundamental shift both in the economy and how you get things done here.
Bruce, that was absolutely fascinating. I could, as always, talk to you for a very, very long time, but I think we're just about at time now. Well, everybody, that was Bruce Katz, co-founder of the NOAC Metro Finance Lab, author and one of the most influential voices on cities and metropolitan economies. From advising presidents and prime ministers to working with civic leaders here in South Yorkshire, Bruce's career is proof that the most powerful solutions often start at the local level. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us on The Digital Forge. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it, subscribe, and stay with us for more conversations about technology, reindustrialisation, and the future of our region. Thank you. Brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely brilliant.